died, the wrath of God was satisfied. For every sin on him is laid. Here in the death of Christ I live. There in the ground his body lay, light of the world by darkness slain, then bursting forth in glorious day, up from the grave he rose again, and as he stands in victory, since curses lost its grip on me, for I am his, and he is mine, for with the precious blood of Christ, guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me, from life's first cry to final breath. Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck me from his hand till he returns or calls me home. Here in the power of Christ shall stand. Christ alone, in Christ alone. Enable. Christy, can you enable, make me co-host again? Need to share the screen. நீ என்ன enable பண்றியா?
I made you
Okay, thank you, Christy. I hope the presentation is visible now.
Yes, we can see it, Richard. Go ahead.
Yes.
I've titled this presentation, The Exodus in History. Just set a little background. When I just left college and I was starting work, or rather I should say I should start from my younger days, when the history book had a great grip on me, and I always had a love for history, and I've kept that love till date. And as I grew up in church and at home, the various episodes from the Bible were taught to us, and we were always taught that there was events which were true events which took place in history. But then when I left college, I started my job, and I started reading about, when I continued to read history, then I found that a lot of the events which the Bible described were not being accepted by the secular world. And it went so far as, I think it was the late 60s and the early 70s, that Time magazine came out with an issue with exactly this picture on the cover. And it said, "Is it all a myth?" So this event in history, the exodus of the Hebrews from Israel under the leadership of Moses, has now been labeled history, a myth in the secular academy. Now, why they do that? Is there no evidence at all available to show that the Exodus was a real event which took place in a certain time and in a certain place? let's see what the story is. So these are the questions we are going to consider today. Is there evidence that the Exodus as described in the Bible ever happened? If there is evidence, what is the type of evidence we would expect to find? What is the verdict of academia? And is there an explanation for this verdict which we get from academia? So we need to see how certain events or all events in history, how they are verified, how they are accepted as history. What is the evidence that makes certain occurrence history and a certain occurrence a fable or a myth? Now, the best thing would be written records from that period. So, do we have any written records that describe the events of the Exodus? Of course, we do. We do have the Bible. The Bible is a written record which describes the events which happened in the far past. And if we look at the Bible like any other document from ancient times, the Bible is a fairly reliable documentation of history. But when it comes to academia, the Bible is not allowed as a source of evidence. Now, this is, we could say that the Bible gives one side of the picture from the Hebrew side, and there is no corroboration from the Egyptian side. Generally, it has been observed that when the events are being recorded by various civilizations, they tend to record their successes and they tend to ignore their failures. And as far as the Egyptian civilization was concerned, the exodus of the Hebrews was a very big failure for their civilization. So we normally would not expect to find any inscriptions or engravings or whatever from the Egyptian sources. But there is an Egyptian source which is available, which describes events which sound remarkably similar to the plagues which fell on the Egyptians during the Exodus. This papyrus is dated, the papyrus is said to have been written during the 12th and 13th dynasties of the Egyptian history. Now, the name of the papyrus is called the Itwa papyrus, and it's now on exhibit at the National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden, Holland. And this papyrus, there is a record which states the Nile has turned to blood. There is weeping in the streets. There is death in every house. The slaves are wearing the ornaments of the masters, and a few more such things. And all these, as we know, sound remarkably like what happened during the Exodus. But if you talk to the curator of the museum, he would say that this is all the imagination of the writer of that papyrus. And anyway, there is no other written record available that can give us any light on the Exodus. So let us see if there is any archaeological evidence. Now, the picture you see on top is from a tomb in Egypt. And this shows the arrival of Semitic people inside Egypt. Now, if we expect to find traces of the Exodus in the ground in Egypt, what should we expect to find? We should expect to find evidence for their arrival, evidence of large settlements, evidence that the settlements were abandoned rapidly, and evidence of this settlement of Hebrews being, rather, we should say there should be evidence of their increase in wealth and then their descent into slavery. Is any such evidence available in Egypt? We find this painting, which is on the tomb at Bene Hassan. There is evidence of brick making, which we find. You see, there has been a dig at a place called Avaris. And this dig was led by the Austrian Manfred Beitak and his team. And they have found a large settlement of Canaanite people over there. And this evidence, and in this dig, they have indications that a prosperous population went from prosperity and slid into slavery. Now, there has been evidence of brick making found there, remains of sheep from Syria, which is the particular type of sheep which the patriarchs used to herd. They've found burials similar to the practices being followed in Canaan. There has been a palace of a high official found of Semitic origin. And this palace is built in the typical building style of northern Canaan. And one of the curiosities of this palace is on its frontage, it has 12 pillars. And in its grounds are 12 tombs. 11 normal-sized tombs and one tomb which seems to be for a very high official, which is a mini pyramid sort of a tomb. And when they excavated and dug into the tomb, they found the tomb had already been dug in and there was nothing inside. So what does the Bible tell us the Israelites did with the body of Joseph when they left Israel, when they left Egypt for Israel? They took Joseph's body along with them for burial in Israel. And in fact, they found pieces of a statue. It was the head and the apart the shoulder which they found. The face had been disfigured, but the hairstyle was typical Canaanite, and the figure was wearing a coat of many colors. They're coming to evidence of the oppression. When they found a lot of burials of infants beneath the houses. And they found that the number of male infants almost doubled that of the female infants. Slave lists have been found with Hebrew names, basically female names, Hebrew names like Sifra and the feminine form of Issachar. They have been found on a papyrus which is called the Brooklyn Papyrus. And this settlement which they found in Avaris has been abandoned suddenly. people left their tools, left everything, and they just vanished en masse. And as an aftermath of the Exodus, what would we expect to find if we look at Egypt's history? It should be a period of confusion when there is loss of central power, and Egypt as such is in a very weakened position. And this is exactly what we find just following the 13th dynasty. Egypt enters its second intermediate age, which is a period of chaos, which is followed by the invasion of the Hyksos. Now, coming to the conquest in Canaan, what would we expect to find in Canaan? Do we find evidence of destroyed cities? Of course we do. We have, when John Garstrang excavated Jericho in the early 20th century, he found the ruins of Jericho, and it was exactly as the Bible had described. The walls had fallen down, the city was put to the sword, the city was burnt. It was not a long siege because a lot of food was found within the city. And he dated the destruction of Jericho to a period which was compatible with the Exodus. But along came Catherine Kenyon in the 1950s. She further excavated in Jericho, and she said, no, this doesn't belong to the period of the Exodus, which they believe happened in the late Bronze Age. They said this destruction happened in the Middle Bronze Age, and all that Joshua would have found had he been such a person at all was nothing there to destroy. Now, the next city we can see is Hazor. Hazor was excavated, and they found 2 levels of destruction in Hazor. And if we read in the Bible, we find that the Hazor was destroyed once during the conquest and once during the time of Judges. And these layers of destruction match the similar periods. And the most interesting thing about Hazor is when they dug down into the palace, they found tablets of correspondence, the letters from the king of that particular city to other kings, and letters from the other kings to this king. And the name on those tablets was Jabin, king of Hazor. And if you recall the name of the king that Joshua killed, the king of Hazor, it is Jabin. You'll find this in Joshua chapter 11. So you'll say, when there's so much of evidence available in the ground, at least, why does the Exodus still be considered a myth? Well, the point is the evidence doesn't speak for itself. Evidence is always interpreted. And interpretation depends on the interpreter's worldview. The same evidence can be used to say, prove what you think about the world. So the secular and atheistic scholars, they say the Exodus story is a myth made up later to give the Israelites a sense of history, while we say that the Exodus event is an actual event in history. But why is this confusion? Now, there are proponents for a late Exodus and an early Exodus from Egypt. The late Exodus proponents date the Exodus to around 1250 BC, which would be during the time of Ramesses II of the 19th century dynasty. Before going into this, just a little bit of Egyptian history is necessary. Egypt's history is divided into 6 periods, or I can say even 7 periods. The periods are called the period of the Old Kingdom, followed by the first intermediate period of the Second Kingdom, followed by the second intermediate, the Middle Kingdom, followed by the second intermediate period, the period of the New Kingdom, followed by the third intermediate period, and then the period of the late kingdom. Now, the periods designated as the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, we have fairly decent amount of information available of events happening during those times. But during the periods which are designated as the first, the second, and the third intermediate periods, very little information is available, and a lot of what is being compiled as Egyptian history during this period is pure guesswork. With this in mind, let's look at the dating of the Exodus. So this 1250 BC date is given because the Bible says that the Israelites built the cities of Pithom and Ramesses for Pharaoh. So they say Ramesses, Pharaoh was there in the 19th dynasty, so those cities had to have been built during the 19th dynasty. So there you have the Exodus during the 19th dynasty. And the proponents of the early Exodus date, the date they ascribed to the Exodus is 1446, 1447 BC. And this date is actually derived from the Bible itself. In 1 Kings 6:1 says that in the 480th year after the children of Israel came out from Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, the work on the temple of Jerusalem was started. So this 4th year of Solomon's reign has been dated to 966 BC. And this date is now accepted, is an accepted date in among all scholars. And this date has been derived by Edwin Thiele in his work, The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings. So he was able to build up the chronology for Israel's monarchy, linking it up with the Assyrian and the Babylonian chronologies, so that we have a fairly reliable chronology. And this dating is considered very reliable. So if we grant 966 BC as the 4th year of Solomon's reign, then the Exodus, if we add 480 years to it, happened in 1446 BC. And now where does 1446 BC fit into the Egyptian history as we have it now? It falls slap bang in the middle of the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. And this date falls during the reign of Amenhotep II. Now there are Bible-believing scholars who have tried to make out a case for this Pharaoh as the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Among them, Douglas Petrovich comes to mind, Bryant Wood comes to mind, and the basic evidence, reasoning they provide is his successor, Tutmosis IV, was not a firstborn. And this we know because he inscribed a stele between the feet of the Sphinx, in which he says in a dream, the Sphinx came to him and asked him to clean the sand between its feet and it would make him king. And he knew he was not in line to be the king. So this, they say he was not a firstborn, so he was not in line. So during the Exodus, the firstborn of the Pharaoh died. So Thutmose IV has become the king after Amenhotep. And then they say Amenhotep II led a campaign to grab slaves from Canaan about 9 to 12 months after the Exodus. Now, this is an argument that doesn't carry much water at all. If Pharaoh's army was destroyed in the Red Sea, chasing after the Israelites, from where did Amenhotep get another army to go and grab as many captives as the number of captives is to be numbered around 110,000 or something like that? Where did he get an army to go and grab this many number of captives? There is also a debate because the Bible is not very clear whether the Pharaoh of the Exodus died in the Red Sea or he did not. The Psalms seem to indicate that he did, whereas the narrative in the Exodus doesn't say that Pharaoh entered the Red Sea. But still, if they say the Pharaoh chased after the Israelites, entered the Red Sea and died, then how do we have Amenhotep, who had a fairly long reign, reigning on after the Exodus? For this, they point to two inscriptions which are available, one in Upper Egypt, one in Lower Egypt. And the one in Upper Egypt claims to be the first campaign of Amenhotep. And the one in Lower Egypt, which is dated 7 years later, also claims to be the first campaign of Amenhotep II. So using this, they say maybe Amenhotep died and they just pushed it under the carpet and another king took his place with the same name. These arguments are well-intentioned. They want to make, they want to prove the historicity of the Exodus, but these arguments are not very strong and not very, very convincing for most of the people. So what is the explanation? Now we need to know how the chronology or the dates for the Egyptian civilization are derived. And this is very important because all the neighboring civilizations, the civilizations which neighbored Egypt around the Mediterranean Sea, be it the Hittites, be it the early Assyrians, be it the Greeks, and be it the early Babylonian Empire, all these dates mostly are derived from Egyptian dates. Scholars have built up a chronology for Egypt, and based on this chronology and the artifacts belonging to each part, each bit of Egyptian civilization, based on dating of those artifacts found in other civilizations, this is how they date those civilizations. Now, the Egyptian chronology is derived from three basic anchors. The first is the sacking of Thebes by Ashurbanipal, the king of Assyria, in 664 BC, and nobody disputes this date. 664 BC, because this has interconnections or synchronisms with Babylonian history, with Israelite history, and with other history of the Middle East. So there is no doubt about this date of 664 BC. The second is the identification of Shoshenq I of the 22nd dynasty as the pharaoh Shishak, who is mentioned in the Book of Kings, 1425 onwards, who attacked Jerusalem and carried off the temple treasures in the years 925 BC. This was during the reign of Rehoboam, son of Solomon, that Shishak came and carried away the temple treasures. Now, how did this dating happen? And the third anchor is the ascension of Amos of the 18th dynasty in 1550 BC, based on the rising of Sothis in 1517 BC. Sothis is the dog star, and they have a way of dating the Egyptians had a very, I should say, strong connection to this dog star, and the rising of this star just after the summer rains was very important. It gave them, they always measured this date so that they could predict the flooding of the Nile, and then the planting could take place at the right time. So with these anchors in place, and with a king list, which was drawn up by an Egyptian priest named Manetho, who lived during the time of the Ptolemies, and who made a king list of Egypt, starting right from the Old Kingdom onwards, with the names of the kings and their approximate regnal lengths. That means the number of years they ruled. Now, based on this, they have fitted the Egyptian history into, and they built the dates for the events in Egyptian history. Now the question is, how reliable are these pillars? As we said earlier, nobody contests the date of 664 BC, the sacking of Thebes by Ashurbanipal. That is a very, very safe anchor. The next anchor we have is the identification of Shoshank I with Shishak. And unfortunately, this is based on a misreading of a name ring and with equating a similar sounding name Shoshank with Shishak. This is how this happened. We have Champollion, he is called the father of Egyptology because he is the one who deciphered the Rosetta Stone, which enabled us to read hieroglyphics. And he went to Egypt with a Bible in his hand, wanting to find synchronisms between Egypt and Israel. His intention was to prove that the Bible was right. So when he reached Karnak and he went to the temple there, now as you go into Karnak temple, as you enter it, on the left-hand side walls, on the outer wall, you will find the whole wall full of reliefs like this. The whole thing is an entire description of a campaign of King Shoshank I. And if you can see these pictures, these are actually pictures of kings. Let me see if I can show you. I can see it a little better here. You see the pictures of the kings, men with their hands tied at the back and with a name ring here. This gives the name of the city which has been captured. So this gives the entire campaign of Shoshank. And as he was reading those name rings, which are in hieroglyphics, he found one which he read as Judah the kingdom. And since Shoshank and Shishak sound similar, and Shoshank I seems to have raided Judah the kingdom, he proposed Shoshank I as the biblical Shishak. And this synchronization has continued till date. Later Egyptologists, even as early as 19th century, they have translated the same name ring in question as the hand of the king and not Judah the kingdom. Hand of the king meaning some sort of an inscription which Shoshank I left in Kim. And if you look at this entire campaign, if you read all the name rings there, it appears that Shoshank I is attacking the northern kingdom of Israel and not the southern kingdom of Judah. And if we remember our Bible correctly, the king of the northern kingdom, Jeroboam I, was an ally of Shishak. And if Shoshank is Shishak, why should he be attacking his own ally? So this date is hanging on very, very slender threads now. And the Sothic dating has also been questioned by many scholars and is very, very shaky at best. So how does this impact the historicity of the Exodus? That is a very valid question now. We need to find an answer to. So starting from the, I should not say 90s, maybe from, but Velikovsky was somewhere during the 50s itself. Some scholars have been saying that the traditional chronology for Egypt is wrong. It needs to be corrected. It needs a lot of correction. And the dates, or rather the period which it involves, has been artificially lengthened. And various scholars have developed their own chronologies to replace the existing conventional chronology of Egypt. I can give you a few of them. A few of them are, we have Immanuel Velikovsky, who proposes Thutmose III of the 18th dynasty as the pharaoh Shishak. And we have Donovan Corwell, who also proposes Thutmose III. We have David Downs. And then we have the later scholars like David Rawle and Peter James, who have also developed a new chronology. And David Rawle proposes Ramesses II as Shishak and not Shoshank I. He bases his conclusions on one of the inscriptions of Ramesses, which is found in the Ramesseum, that is the temple of Ramesses located in Luxor. There, one of the cities conquered in one of his campaigns includes a city called Salem. And if Salem, we all know, is one of the names for Jerusalem. So he seems to have implicitly claimed to have conquered Jerusalem. And in the temple at Abu Simbel, there is inside the temple on one of the walls, there is a depiction of Ramesses II attacking a fortified city which is on a mountain. And the people in the city are depicted as Semitic, and Ramesses is attacking this from the lower level, and he's trying to breach the city itself. I have personally seen this relief, and what conclusions Rawle draws from this relief are, I would agree with them 100%. But the third and most telling thing is it appears that Ramesses, whose full throne name was Washmuriya Shatapnariya Ramessia Miriamun. This was his throne name, but nobody used the full name in addressing him. So commonly he was addressed as Shisha. And there is no great distance between Shisha and Shishak. So if Ramesses II is Shishak, then his reign doesn't take place in the 13th century, but it goes into the 10th century, that is somewhere in the early 900s. And if the 19th dynasty goes down to the 10th century, the earlier dynasties also fall down similarly. And which dynasty do we find now, which is ruling during the time of the Exodus, which is 1446, because we are not touching the biblical date as such, we are touching only the Egyptian dates. In the new chronology, the entry into Egypt and the Exodus would happen during the 12th and the 13th dynasties. The Exodus left chaos in its wake in Egypt with the onset of the second intermediate period and the invasion of the Hyksos. We saw in the beginning that there is enough evidence on the ground during the period of the 12th and the 13th dynasties, and we can say now in the new chronology, the Exodus happened at the end of the 13th dynasty, which seems to fit all the evidence which is available. The destruction of Jericho and Hazor occur in the Middle Bronze Age, because these dates also slide down correspondingly. As brought out by Catherine Kenyon, that Jericho was destroyed in the Middle Bronze Age. Yes, Jericho was destroyed in the Middle Bronze Age, but the dating of the Middle Bronze Age is now 1400 BC and not 1550 BC like earlier. With the new chronology now, everything is fitting together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I do not know if any of you have watched this documentary movie, The Patterns of Evidence, Exodus, where the director uses the wall of time to explain how these things work out. So here we have the top picture depicts the things as they are right now in the conventional chronology. So here we have these colored blocks representing arrival of the Israelites, multiplication, they're going into slavery, the judgment, the Exodus, and then the conquest. But they seem out of sync in the conventional dating system. When we apply the new chronology, you find that there is now a perfect synchronization between the events as described in the Bible and as found in the ground in Egypt. And these blocks, which are on the upper level and on the lower level, they are now synchronized completely. The new chronology also solves two other problems. In the current dating scheme, the United Kingdom under David and Solomon would fall in the Iron Age. Skeptics have long said that the Bible presents this era as Israel's golden age, whereas the archaeological finds in the Iron Age indicate an entirely different story of poverty in place of great wealth. In the new chronology, the same period would now come under the late Bronze Age, which was a period of great wealth as depicted in the Bible. In the ancient world, the surrounding cultures, we said, take their dates from Egypt. Now, the archaeology of these cultures exhibit a curious gap of around 300 years towards the end of the Late Bronze Age and the Iron Ages. Since the dating is based on Egyptian artifacts, it appears as though these cultures had no contact with the world at large during this period. What I mean to say is that when they are digging in these places, they found a certain artifact which they did in the conventional dating to a certain period. And in the immediate next layer, they find an artifact which is 300 years later, in some cases even 500 or 600 years later. But there doesn't seem to be any indication that there was a break in the occupation of that particular site they are digging. So it is as if there is a gap of 300 years in the evidence record. Now, the new chronology does away with this darkness by knocking away the 300 years, which seem to have been unnecessarily added on into the Egyptian chronology. I mean, this 300 years is very aptly, rather, it is brought out very clearly by Bruce Gore in his work, The Historical and Chronological Context of the Bible, when he's discussing the end of the period of the judges and the early monarchy. So he makes a very, very curious statement. He says, while Israel is now a monarchy and it is getting established and is flourishing, the rest of the world seems to be dark. It's not that the rest of the world is dark. It's unnecessarily 300 years have been added on to the history of those countries. That's what way we don't find anything in the ground for this. Now, I would personally agree with David Rawls' reconstruction, and I would need to touch upon his colleague Peter James also. I've not read Peter James' work till now because I'm finding very difficult to get hold of his book. I do not know if anyone can find that book. I would like to have a read. It's called Centuries of Darkness by Peter James. The only copy I could find was costing something like 19,000 rupees. So he, to some extent, is aligned with David Rawls' chronology, but he makes Ramesses III Shishak and not Ramesses II. So there is a difference of about 50 years in their chronology. And he is also not wrong because even Ramesses III was known as Shishak. When you go to the Valley of Kings and you visit Ramesses III tomb, you can find a picture of Ramesses and his wife sitting on the thrones and their daughter approaching them and addressing him as Shisha. So Shisha seems to be a shortened form of Ramesses. So, and this is where the biblical name Shishak most probably comes from. That is my opinion. The only thing which stops me 100% going behind this dating scheme and really accepting it as gospel is there's only one small snag here, that in the New Kingdom, the 18th dynasty pharaoh Thutmose III was a warrior king, and he had control of most of Canaan at that time. And if Ramesses II is the pharaoh of the Exodus, then there should have been some mention, at least, of Egyptian activity during the period of Judges, which we do not find in the Bible. I need to find an answer for this. Then we'll know where we stand as far as the new chronologies are concerned. While discussing this, I would need to tell you, perforce, that Velikovsky and Kurvil, they make Tutmosis III himself as Pharaoh Shishak. Now, their dating is based on an extended reign of the Hyksos kings, which doesn't seem warranted. And Tutmosis III as Shishak doesn't seem to have much evidence on the ground, though Velikovsky in his book, Ages in Chaos, seems to argue a very, very strong case for Tutmosis III, but it's pure argument. His argument is very lucid, very convincing, but it's not, it has very, very few facts on the ground which help to convince you. His theory is that if you know Egyptian history, Tutmosis III's predecessor was Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh. She was the wife of his father, but she was not his mother. She was the wife of his father. And she was made co-regent when his father died. And Tutmosis at that time was very young. He was around 5 years or 6 years old. And after 2 years, Hatshepsut completely took over all the power and declared herself pharaoh. She made herself pharaoh, and she ruled for about 18 years till Tutmosis was around 23, 24, and then he seems to have overthrown his stepmother and then taken the kingdom for himself. Now, Velikovsky's theory is that Hatshepsut is the queen of Sheba. And he bases his theory on a panel of carvings in the temple of Hatshepsut at Luxor. I have seen this temple. I've gone to inspect the carvings, and there is nothing much in the carvings which would convince you that Hatshepsut was the queen of Sheba. But his argument is like this. So since his stepmother went and she saw Solomon's glory and came back and made such a blah about it, he was so irritated, he went and attacked Jerusalem and brought back all the stuff that was there in the temple. That's the sort of argument he gives. There's very little evidence on the ground that is backing him. But Donovan Courville also agrees with his dating system. But I have not been able to land my hands on his book also. Once I have a read of Courville's case for a longer, or rather a shorter Egyptian chronology, then we would be in a better place to take a call on which of these chronologies actually describes the picture. But it is for sure that Shoshank I is not Shishak. And once that goes, now we can find the right place in history where the Exodus occurs. And I think we should now be in a position to draw this conclusion that the Bible is correct in whichever field it addresses, be it history or science or any other field. And it is only that we humans need to realize that God's word can never be wrong. Our thinking and our way we look at things can never match the way of God. So when we approach and study these things, we need to approach and study them with the proper attitude so that we can find the right answers. In fact, all that we need to know that the Exodus is true, that Jesus considered Moses a historical person. Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life, said, Moses wrote about me. That's enough for me. Thank you. And if anyone has questions, we'll take them now.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This is Leela.
Yeah, Leela, lovely to hear your voice.
I think you can see me now. Anyway, thank you so much and for sharing your research. And I know there are archives all over, and I think with your detailed level of writing, once something like this is published, you will get access to so much more information. So thank you so much for sharing it. My question is actually more about the practice of the moving of the tent of the covenant that used to go all over. And in it, there are a lot of references to climatic occurrences, such as the falling of
Shall we
fish,
tell them
I
that we
think
are
it
leaving
was,
for
from the sky, so much so that they could eat, a whole lot, and it had never happened before, or other things. And I think that now, with such advanced research on climate and climate change and things, I think there's a lot of dating of events that actually related to the climatic conditions at the time would also be very helpful. So this is just my thoughts, because I'm very interested in what happened then, and having lived through a forest fire,
I know.
realize that
I've
there's
not
so
really
much that
found
needs to be looked
anything.
at. So thank you.
To answer your question, Leela, I've not found really anything that in this line of trying to match temperature ranges and using the weather patterns, in fact, to try and date events. Let me dig in a little more. Maybe I'll find. I was looking at it more from a historical, archaeological, and a documentary side of things.
Thank you very much.
Hmm? Comment on it. Yeah, Peter James's Centuries of Darkness. Leela, you wanted the name. Peter James's Century of Darkness. And Donovan Corwell is the Exodus question and its ramifications.
Yes, because I know that there are many theological libraries where you can borrow
Okay,
chapters.
I didn't search a theological library. I searched, when I visited my son, I searched the local libraries there.
No. You will get these in theological libraries. And I had a friend who...
No, Peter James, I doubt you'll get it in a theological library because it is a pure secular work.
If it's about dating the Bible, it will be there.
No, it's basically about dating Egyptian chronology.
Okay. Egyptology.
David Roll and Peter Roll,
Yes.
let me make it clear, they are not biblical scholars.
Okay. All right. They're Egyptologists.
But
Yeah,
who
they're
believe?
Egyptologists.
David Roll claims himself as an agnostic, but he says where Bible talks about history, the Bible is 100% accurate.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Pastor, can we wind up with a word of prayer?
Rachana, Helen this side.
Yeah, Helen.
Because of the connectivity issues, I'll not be able to open the video.
Okay.
Your presentation brought in a very rich chronological and well-researched archival literature, because in the modern days, the biblical matters, if we could present it in a similar fashion with the substantiated with scientific evidence and also supplementing with archival literature, and how the times when, as you were telling the names, Shushank, and that how it gets interchanged. So this kind of rich research will really contribute very significantly in establishing the biblical fact. Very many congratulations for giving us an opportunity to understand. It really enhanced our understanding on this historical facts, which you have also substantiated with the photographs, with the dates, and also very systematically, sequentially, logically, and scientifically presentation. Immensely benefited out of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Pastor, I have a suggestion. Is Pastor online?
Sent a message in the chat that he had to leave for some meeting. So
Okay. In fact,
chat might be present.
see, I have this movie with me. I have it in a digital format. The documentary I talked about, Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus. So if we can have I think some sort of a viewing like this over, let's say, a Zoom meeting or something, I think the members can have an even better picture of the whole the discussion over the dating of the Exodus. It's a wonderful movie in case you've not seen it. It's made by Tim Mahoney. It's the first in a series of movies he calls Patterns of Evidence. The first is the Exodus. Next was the Moses controversy. Now he's come up to the Red Sea miracles. And the next movie, which is just about to come out, will be regarding Mount Sinai. So he talks to all scholars from both sides, the biblical scholars, the non-biblical scholars, or rather the secular scholars and the academia, and he tries to present the evidence as it is. So people are interested, we can have a viewing of the movie. And in fact, David Roll, whom I was talking about, he appears in that movie. He is one of the main scholars whom Tim relies upon. And in fact, after the movie was released, this movie was being shown in churches and states where they used to show the movie. And before the movie, they used to have a sort of discussion with both Tim and David Roll being present. And Roll has now come out with a follow-up book following the movie with much more evidence which has been gathered in the last 20 years or so. And he's trying to make his case much stronger. I have just read about 30%, 40% of that new book. So I have not included any material from that here. I felt this itself made a fairly strong case. But if necessary, once I finish that book, I'll be in a better position. Maybe I can add a few more things to it. Now, it was available on Netflix for some time, and then Netflix withdrew it. It's not available on Amazon Prime. I bought it. I bought a digital copy from its patternsofexodus.org. That's their website. Or you can reach them through the Historical Faith Society. So in case of no questions, Mr. Peter, can we wind up?
Yeah, I guess we should wind up if there are no questions on it. Thank you so much. Appreciate all the effort that you've taken. It's very enlightening.
Shall we wind up with a prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for this time you've given us to spend together, to consider events that happened in our history that still have a bearing in our lives today. Lord, you have given us your word, through which you tell us that part of history which is important to us. Lord, help us always to have a high regard for your word as the truth. Because whatever the world may say, your word stands alone in that it alone is sufficient for us. And Father, thank you that we were able to do this. Thank you for giving me the wisdom and the ability to communicate the ideas clearly. Father, help us to take this sort of meeting and understanding the Bible further through further meetings. Lord, as we depart, we ask for your presence to be with all of us. Bless us and lead us every day of our lives. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hope you'll be able to conduct many such more such interactions or other presentations.
Yes,
Let's see.
that would be really helpful in understanding the kind of, one could see the intensity of the research which has gone into the presentation. So we're looking forward to many more such occasions to listen to your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.